our stories like that between a lot of people don't see the parallels at times between what Black people and brown people, Latinos of all different, because there's so many different kinds
Right.
of from so many different people of different heritages. We have a lot of the similar stories. Now, obviously, yours is a little bit different from mine. Is that you're first generation American, right?
Yes.
First generation American. Tell me about your family background and how it's been for you as a first generation U.S. citizen living in a very diverse, culturally and everything diverse place in Texas.
Yeah. Well, wow. How has it been? So here in the United States, family. So when I was younger, my parents divorced, and I guess you could say we're estranged from my real father's side of the family. So on my mom's side, all of my family is back in Mexico, except for one cousin that I have in Michigan. And
Go figure.
right? And so we don't ever get to see her, and she's there. The rest of my family is in Mexico, and my stepdad, our family on my stepdad's side, they're all in Guatemala. So we're it. It's me, my two younger sisters. I have a little nephew, my mom, and my dad. And that's all that we have here in the United States. And so that was interesting in terms of, going into school. I remember one of the first weeks that I was there, because I didn't mention this before, but I was in the Longhorn band.
Really?
So I played on the drum line. I was my little toot my horn. I was the only freshman in 2008 to make the drum line. I played cymbals.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it was a fun time. Really time consuming, which is why I didn't continue. But anywho, I was back. I came to Austin early that summer because of band. We had summer band that we had to get ready for. And I remember seeing these girls who were like really dressed up, really, beautiful, dressed to the nines. And they were walking all over campus. And I was like, what is, did I miss the memo? Like, these girls are pristine. And I didn't know what that was. And, you meet friends in college. Everybody's going to be your friend. I met a few girls. I was like, what are they doing? And they were like, oh, they're rushing. And I was like, huh? What? like they're late? Like, what's going on?
That's why they're rushing, is they're late to where they're supposed to be going.
I was like, what is that? And they were like, no, like it's Greek week. And I was like, like Greek heritage. I didn't know there was a Greek community in Austin. They're like, no, like sororities. I was like, what's a sorority? So I had no idea what that was. Because in Mexico they don't have that. There's no such thing as fraternities and sororities. So that was an interesting concept to understand. And you might be thinking, well, didn't you see it in like media growing up and things like that? Well, growing up, as the oldest, you take on a lot of responsibilities as the oldest, especially if you're in an immigrant family, and especially if it's Mexican American. A lot of people always joke around. They're like, Leslie, I can't believe you've seen this movie. I can't believe you haven't seen that movie. And I mean, name a movie that's really popular culture that you think people should have watched, and I probably haven't watched it. And so I always like to inadvertently give little jabs at people, and I'm like, no, I didn't watch it because as a 9-year-old, I was cooking dinner and making sure my sisters were doing homework because my mom was working 3 jobs. So sometimes then they feel awkward. They're like, oh, but I mean, I just make a joke out of it. But yeah, it's been interesting. And you mentioned that Austin is such a diverse place. And it is, but it isn't. In fact, I wrote a paper on this when I was in college. Austin touts itself as the live music capital of the world. But I remember when I was in college in 2008, they didn't even have a Spanish language radio station.
in
Like,
in Texas, where
yeah, they had,
you would think, and maybe this is my being naive. I've only been in Texas very briefly on a layover when I was flying to the West Coast once. So I just was in and out of Houston within about 2 hours. I had
yeah,
always assumed that Texas, with its heavy Spanish speaking population and obviously the ties to Mexico and everything else, I just assumed it was a given that there's a
yeah,
Spanish language station in every major city in Texas. Austin doesn't
yeah.
have one. Like the state
It
capital with a major university there doesn't have one.
Let me rephrase. It has one, but it was the traditional, like traditional Mexican music. Like we call it banda norteña. So when you go into a taco shop, and if we've got all of my brown people back there cooking tacos and dinner for people, and you hear that music, that kind of music, yes, they had one station. But coming from Dallas, we had like 3, 4, 5 stations that were like Spanish pop. Then you had the Spanish ballad station. Then you had like the banda station. Then you had like a Spanish kind of news station. And unless I wasn't finding them, they weren't here. And then the only hip hop station that they had here in Austin at the time that I remember, it wasn't really hip hop, like not like Dallas hip hop, where they were playing, actual hip
They
hop
weren't playing
music.
actual rap music. This was a lot different,
Right,
it sounds like.
right. This was, like they were playing Black Eyed Peas on the hip hop station here,
Oh
and
boy. And not like the early Black Eyed Peas before Fergie showed up and they started
no,
being a pop group.
yeah, this was Fergie pop, and I'm thinking like, where, what? How is this the live music capital of the world? What is going on? So I wrote a whole paper on that, and I remember my teacher, she just kind of smiled at me and didn't say much. She was later on, she was also my Latino policy professor, so there was a lot of things for us to uncover in terms of Austin's diversity. So yeah, I don't know if I really answered your question, but yeah.
You give me a bit more insight. I will say this. It says, I'm also thinking along the lines of where we are in this country and where we've been, especially
Mm-hmm.
last 3.5, 4 years or so. It has not been the kindest place toward immigrants, people from
Yeah.
immigrant families, and particularly Spanish-speaking immigrants. More so, Mexicans have been more vilified. I will just say wrongly. I won't say rightly. Wrongly vilified by a certain segment of this country for the better part of the last 5 years. And truth be told, for years prior to that. I mean, we've talked
Mm-hmm.
before where I just think about how the issues with how Black Americans right now and everything we're dealing with whether it's institutional racism, police brutality, we're dealing with issues with jobs and with poverty. All those issues also run into Latino communities too, like all of them.
Yeah.
It's comes from, and like immigrant families and Latino communities are like the immigrant families and Black communities where we have African immigrants who come into this country and deal with a lot of the same things. What has it
Mm-hmm.
been like for you being Mexican American? Last few years have not been good at all
Yeah.
in terms of just the attitudes toward immigrants, particularly from Mexico. What's it been like for you, both first personally and
Mm-hmm.
then as a journalist, where you're expected to keep some level of, and people watching the video will see me put these quote marks up, objectivity. I talked about that in the monologue too, but it's the idea of you having to be objective despite the fact that you see everything that's happening and experience it firsthand.
Yeah. I think personally, it's been difficult. Regardless of what political standings, politics aside, just looking basically at humanity, it's been difficult. Even with the border crisis, I think both Republicans and Democrats both recognize that there is a crisis at the border, and a lot of people want to help solve that issue, however, you think it needs to be solved. But seeing those images of, children, it even, makes me emotional now thinking about those, because, who's to say that that couldn't have been me? My mom was pregnant when she came over, and by chance, who knows what that timeline would have been? Who knows, what if she'd gone into labor as she was coming to the United States? Albeit things were a little bit different 30 years ago in terms of crossing. So you didn't see, there were people that were crossing that way, but a lot of times it wasn't as dramatized. Right now, because there are so many restrictions, is why you see people crossing that way. And my mom has since become a United States citizen, and she's very proud of that. But I just, I think about these images, these children that are kept in these holding cells. A lot of people describe them as cages. It's been difficult to see your people like that. And you mentioned somewhat the parallels to the Black community. A Black person is constantly seeing their people being brutalized. And so I think the parallel there is same thing. Brown people, we're seeing our people brutalized, and it's hard. It's hard to be able to separate yourself from that as a journalist. And then, that kind of segues perfect into how you separate it as a journalist. It's hard. And I think that's why even more so I've been able to hold on to yoga and what it has done for me, because you're not allowed to say one way or another. A lot of times now social media has become this outlet of I feel something and I am going to write it on social media so everyone can know how I feel. We're not afforded the same opportunities as journalists, because that's what naturally comes when we sign up to be journalists. You don't give an opinion one way or another. You give the facts, and then that's what you give. And so in a lot of ways, and I've seen articles starting to come up on that. I shared a New York Times article that said, younger journalists are basically saying enough. You cannot separate your human experience from what you're reporting. And
Exactly.
I think that's really cool. And I think it's really powerful. And I'm really on board with that. I know I haven't been in the industry for 20 years like some folks. I'm not a super veteran journalist, but I am coming up on 10 years in the industry. And I still remember at my first job where gay marriage was going through the Supreme Court. And I remember my manager saying, well, you're not going to find anybody in town that's gay that's going to be able to talk to you on camera. They're not going to talk to you. They're not going to talk to you about being gay. And I still remember I found a hair salon owner, and he talked to me about being gay and what gay marriage would mean to him. And I remember coming back to my managers like a huge grin, being like, I did it. Found someone who's gay in Southeast Texas, and here's the story. And it was just really cool to be able to say I did something like that. But going back to the point of just how much time has changed, and how really these young journalists are fed up, and I think change is coming for not only society, but I think journalism too.